everyone. Welcome back to Amorte. I'm excited to share season 7 with you. And I have a very special guest with us today. It's always so helpful to have these spaces where we can have these honest conversations around death, grief, and everything it means to live fully with all that we have to carry in our hearts. So today we're going to talk deeply about a very important topic, which is teen suicide. And it's a subject that's often met with silence, stigma, and fear, but it also demands our attention and our compassion and our willingness to listen. Every year, thousands of young people die by suicide, and it leaves communities, family members struggling to understand what's going on and make sense of it all. So it's a very profound impact. So I'm so grateful to have, and so honored at the same time, to have Dr. Stephen Karaiskos here with us today to share some light on this very important subject. He lost his partner by suicide, David, 16 years ago. He's an educator and mental health advocate who worked on the award-winning documentary Talking Out Loud, which brings teen voices and real stories into the conversation about suicide prevention. So together, we're going to explore what it means, what all of like the important subjects around this very, very, very important matter. And so I want to begin by acknowledging that this conversation could be triggering. So please, if someone you know is struggling, please know that you're not alone and that there are people who want to help. And I will list some resources so that you can have them available to you if needed. And so welcome, Dr. Karaiskos. It's such a pleasure to have you here on Amorte with us. And I'd love to start by asking, what inspired you to work on Talking Out Loud, and what impact have you seen from the stories you shared in the documentary?
Yeah, thank you for having me, and congrats on 7 years. That's amazing, and all this good work you're doing. A couple of years ago, I'm going to back up just a bit. So, the work of Talking Out Loud, which is a free resource, it's a documentary about teens who've had a loss to suicide. And I'll talk about the connection there to the prevention work, right? Because there's a little bit bereavement and prevention work are connected. So the documentary itself, my story is, again, like you shared, I had a loss to suicide 16 years ago. And at the time I was a teacher. I was a early childhood teacher, kindergarten, pre-K, and in the States. And I, after my loss, I said, I need to understand this more. I need to understand loss more. I need to understand mental health more. I need to understand suicide more. And so that's why I went back and earned that title that is there now. But then then I said, well, I gotta go do this work. And so I re-entered schools, but I also started doing work supporting people on both sides of the cause. And what I mean by the cause is the prevention work, which is really teaching people about how to support each other, how to care for each other. And then the bereavement work, which is very similar. Like, how do we help people after they've had a loss? Because we also know that when you're struggling with grief, is that it can create dynamics that you may feel high levels of loss and things like that increase your potential for suicidal thoughts also. So we want to get in there and do that work on both sides of this issue. So I've been doing work for years now around group work, what we call peer support group work, which is having people gather and have them share their stories of loss. And that's all about building connection and building community. And doing those groups, I did one specific group with teens, and I did that for a couple of years. And we decided that we really wanted the voice of teens to be elevated, right? A lot of this work, whether it's prevention or bereavement, is very much research and adults telling everyone what to do. And that's a very important piece. And the lived experience of the teenagers who are part of this world today, we need to gather their voices. And so that's part of what the documentary was, really hearing from the teens about their work around grief work, which is actually then hopefully building resilience and strength so they can tackle other things in life. And it's the same with the prevention work that I did through an organization called Samaritans, which is one of the largest nonprofits doing prevention work on the East Coast of the United States. And that prevention work there was really about raising the voices of the teens, the young people, the marginalized communities that suicide impacts the most, so that a lot of the new suicide prevention work is very contextualized and culturally appropriate and in the voice of the people that are experiencing and having the largest impact. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. One of the things that really stood out for me about the documentary was when all of the teenagers seemed to agree that there are so many different ways of grieving that they didn't like to be stuck in these phases or told what it's supposed to look like. And I think that was very, very, very important to understand what it is about them. And another thing that was tremendously surprising to me was their capacity to hold. They're so resilient. Mm-hmm. They have so many more tools than we give them credit for.
Yes. Yes. And I thank you for opening that conversation, because I do think that's a critical piece of this. And I will share that I learned so much by listening to these teens. They have helped me with my own grief process. And I also, not only do I support teens, but I also support other communities like people in their 30s and 40s. And sometimes what I'm sharing with older individuals who are grieving, I'm like, let me tell you what the teens said, because there's a wisdom there that we don't always tap into. I think one of the things a couple of things there that's happening for the teens is they are still forming their identity. Right. So for me, having my loss later on in my life, my identity was kind of formed, and it did upheave my identity. But teens are in a place where their identity is still being formed. And most of the teens I've supported, of course, they're all unique in their own journey, will say things like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm 16. And what does my whole future mean and look like? And they really want to answer that question. And so they really want to do the grief work, which is fascinating, because so many adults go, I don't want to do that, or it's too hard. The teens want to do it. So as an example, just a really quick example is I do weekly groups, and they're 10 weeks at a time. And then we start over, and some teens continue. I don't have absences. The teens show up week in and week out to do their work, because they know it's going to help them. So then the hope is, when they're doing this work at 16, 17 years old, because it's forming their identity, they're forming an identity in strength and in resilience. And in, I did this. I had this tremendous loss that is going to change my life, and I tackled it. And now I'm going to have new skills for the next thing that happens in my life, or the next stumble, or even the next large loss. So it's really an identity forming moment, which is why I think teens have a unique wisdom and perspective to it, that most of them haven't had another loss. So they're looking at it in a whole different way that is really, it can be really revealing to others. And that's why I think the documentary, so many adults have said, I learned so much from those teens. And then I think the other piece you brought up, which I'll just share, is that the grief journey is different for every single person. And that is really hard especially when you think about a family who's had a loss, or a family that's having someone struggling, is that let's say there's a couple siblings and a set of parents, right? Each one of those individuals is going to have their own journey of guilt, of grief, of stigma, of loving memories, of painful memories, of complexity to the humanity of every person there. So they're going to have their own individual journey that they have to take, and then they have a journey as a family unit. And both those have to happen. And it's really hard. And so that's why sometimes the work it's not even twofold, it's threefold. It's really complex. I have my own journey, and then I have to work with my parents, or the parent that might be the parent that's left. And then I have my friends, and I have all these layers, and the teens are doing it in so many different ways. They're going to school, they're playing soccer, they're going to church, they're engaging, getting ready to college or a job, and they're navigating their siblings and a parent, right? So it's really important that we hear them and learn from them. Yeah.
Yes, and they also mentioned that most of the books that their parents or their community or their teachers had been bringing to them to help them deal with their grief process were written by grown-ups and many of the things they don't relate to. So do you have anything to share with us to bring some light on the things that they're doing different and maybe some recommendations that you have for
Thank you for that. Yeah.
For what works with teens?
Yes. That's a great question. So I think there's a really sweet moment in the documentary that you might remember. What the young man Anish actually says out loud. He says, I really, I love that my mom keeps giving me these books, but I haven't read any of them, right? And it's just a very sweet moment. And I do think the part of the struggle, and they say it out loud in the documentary, and they said it out loud many times, is that these books are written by adults, right? And I think really, truly, as part of what it's kind of a dream of mine, actually, is to work with these young people to actually write their own book. To then the documentary is one step, right? So we gather their voices to share with others. And I think a book and a journaling type resource would be really helpful. I think part of the other struggle and a bit around this grief work is everyone does it differently. We just talked about that. But some people like to journal. Some people like to exercise. Some people like to listen to music. And so it can be really hard to give a one size fits all to the grief journey, which is why sometimes talking it through and really trying to identify how I grieve, not how a book tells me to grieve. A book might give me ideas. A therapist is going to be a necessary process. And I still have to discover how I grieve, whether I'm 16 or 40. How do I grieve? What do I need? Because I think it's really challenging for me to say, okay, all you teens need to journal. And one of them says, I need to release my energy. Can I go on a run? I'm like, go on a run. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. Just do what you need to do. But there's a self-discovery there, just like there is in their own identity, right? I think there are a lot of resources out there. They're just kind of hard to find. And what I mean by that is the system and structures around this work. There's still a lot of stigma to suicide. There's still a lot of misunderstanding of it. So it gets hidden a bit. And then when you add complexities such as the way it impacts in different ways marginalized communities, such as the Black community and the LGBT community and things like that, it even gets hidden a little bit more or lessened a little bit more in society. So the resources are out there. They're just hard to find. I wish they were more accessible, but I do have a couple that I'll share. And I'm only pausing because through Samaritans in Boston, which is Boston based, they have a peer-to-peer teen text line that is called Hey Sam. And I'll make sure you have that resource. I'm not sure if it's accessibility across outside of the United States, but the goal of it, which is a fantastic goal, is it's teens talking to teens. And so if a teen is struggling, let's say with just even if it's just like, I can't get my homework done, let alone a bigger crisis, sometimes they don't want to talk to adults. And we have teens who've been trained to listen to other teens. And so sometimes teens knowing that I have a peer-to-peer resource, and the teens that have been trained also know when to do a pass off to someone if a need is there. So that type of support is out there. There's also one of the other organizations that I do work with is an organization called the Kita Center, which is based in Maine, again, the United States based. And there's there isn't a lot internationally. There are, so don't get me wrong. But the Kita Center is in Maine, and it's a camp. It's a summer camp program for young people who had a loss to suicide. So we have about 60 kids every summer who come to camp. We've expanded our program and we're building new buildings now. There's a sadness to the fact that we have to expand programming. And at the same time, we have some funding that we can do it and reach more people. So a program like that gives kids a space to go to for a whole week, all summer long, to talk about their brother they lost, to talk about their father they lost, in a non-judgmental space where everyone else is there. So the grieving process is kicked up a notch, and they are embraced by everyone there. Because one of the biggest pieces around grief work specifically, and what's fascinating about it too, is on both ends of the suicide spectrum. What I mean by that is post prevention to postvention, the whole range of it, is connection is so important. So if you've had a loss, being connected with other people makes you not feel as alone. If you are struggling and you're at the other end, like, oh my gosh, I'm really overwhelmed, and you start thinking that you're the only one, and then that escalates thoughts, right? So on both ends, it's about connection, it's about belonging, it's about relationships. And that's what the camp does. And that's what hopefully a lot of the prevention work that we do when we go into schools and so on is doing also. Yeah.
Well, you've said so many things that I have questions around. So
sure, of course.
and rewind a little bit. But
please.
One of the things that you mentioned is the problems with struggling with doing homework. There's so many things that come up in a community when a teenager or anyone really dies by suicide. It kind of brings up all of these questions of high and attention, of hyper alertness, of what did I miss? Why did I miss it? What wasn't I looking at? And I know that for teens especially, as you mentioned, it's quite different for someone who is a grown up who already has different. Their life is kind of has settled in many ways. So the conflicts are different. They're not like the hormones aren't up and about as it happens in a teenager. So I know in communities when a teenager dies by suicide, it's like they want to know what they should be looking for, what they missed. There's a lot of guilt around what happened that I didn't see it coming. Yeah. It happens with the siblings, with the friends at school, with the teachers, with the whole community is just so affected. And there's so much vigilance in the surroundings afterwards, the aftermath. Yes. And so what are some of the things you would tell, like for teachers that are listening to this, siblings, friends, parents that want to know answers, sometimes we even feel like we need to blame someone. We need to put the finger on someone who should have, caught it, because of certain behaviors or things that were happening in school. And so there's a tremendous amount of pressure also in schools with the teachers, with the staff, with everyone around. It's like parents wanting answers.
Yes. And that's one of the things that is so challenging about a loss of suicide, right? Is that we want answers, and just to be really direct, we're probably not going to get a whole bunch of them. Suicide is a very complex thing. And so the research will say, as well as, the experiences of people, that every suicide, it's a very complex thing that's happened there. So it's typically not one thing. It's multiple things that have happened, right? And it may sometimes appear that it's one thing because of the last thing that happened, right? But it's typically a series of things that's led them there. There are different types of suicide to talk about. And we won't get deep into it today probably, but there are the rash ones that we see more often, and the planned out. There's all these. That's why I say it's very complex. And typically there's many reasons that a suicide does happen. I share that because that sometimes then can help in the understanding when we do grief work with an entire school community about guilt, shame, blame, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, all those other pieces, because we can't all have eyes on that one individual who's struggling all the time, right? So I may see something, but I may have saw that they were late to class. And then someone else saw something that maybe they stopped putting their homework in, or what. So it's happening in multiple places, which is why it's so important that proactively we are keeping up our eyes and our ears and our connections to our students and our young people, because I can't see everything that's happening for every young person that's in front of me. Like if I was working in a school, I just see moments of time. But if I see a moment of time, and I mentioned this to a counselor, and the counselor is talking to another teacher, all of a sudden we have a pattern of behavior that maybe we can get ahead of, right? And that's not to say what it could have, should have. It's just thinking about the structures and systems that are in schools that don't allow that to happen sometimes, because we're not all informed. It's a one-off that, oh, they haven't had homework in my chemistry class for 6 weeks, and they don't know that maybe other teachers are hearing the same thing, and homework is not the only thing, but what is happening for that child that we need to get in front of. I think then if there is a loss, the guilt, blame, shame, this is such a unique thing to suicide loss. As an example, years ago, my father passed away from cancer. He knew it was coming. He was able to say goodbye to people. It was almost like he lived this long life. We were able to kind of close a book and say goodbye. I mourn him. I miss him. But I still have guilt and shame that I still deal with based on my suicide loss that was 16 years ago. Because we don't have answers. We're not able to close that book. We're not able to understand what happened. And I'll share one more piece about it, and then I'll pause just to make sure I don't go on too much of a tangent, is that the other thing that can be helpful sometimes, and teens actually hear this too, is that, there's a lot of people that do a lot of deep work and research for years and decades around understanding suicide. And there's a lot of really good research out there. I learned it through the work that I've been doing, and I apply it right now. But there's only theories. There's only theories, because no one can know what's happening in someone else's mind. We can try to understand and try to see and look at stories and look at moments. But that's the biggest struggle around this, is that some of the woulda, coulda, shoulda, some of the questions we have, part of the struggle is to be able to say out loud, I may never have an answer to that. And I have to be okay moving forward, knowing that or learning what I learned from the story of the person that we lost. How can we do things differently? How can I raise my awareness? How can I look at people that are struggling, or look at what's happening in the structure of a school, that we can create systems differently that don't create the same avenue that person might have lived, right? So that's the hardest part. There's no answers.
Stephen, thank you so much for all of that information, because at least me hearing that, the level of anxiety inside, knowing that, there are things that you can prepare for, there are things that you might never be able to understand why it happened. And it could be something, especially around teenagers. Well, I think just, humans, in how we react to different situations. Mm-hmm. It might be out of a moment of anger, a moment of frustration, a moment of despair, especially when you're a teenager and maybe your heart got broken, you broke up with your boyfriend, or you had a fight with your best friend, or you failed some exams and you don't know how you're going to tell your parents. And in this moment of absolute desperation, it could just be a moment. It doesn't have to be. And I would love if you could explain a little bit this.
Yeah, thank you. It is that can become really challenging to, if you're a parent or a friend, and to understand that, right? Again, it's that work we have to do through the guilt, shame piece around our feelings around it, that to navigate it. But I'll get more closely to what you're asking is, the thing is, when we're talking about teens, which is why it's really important, the teen prevention work is so heightened. It's not just, I think about prevention, and that's usually considered crisis management. Like if a child says, I am, they're in a place where they're ideating, they're thinking about it, or they actually say out loud, I am. That's important work. But there's also pre-prevention. I don't even know the word for it sometimes, but how do we help kids to know how to navigate that before they get to a crisis level? And that's the work that I think is really important. So let's say, my if I've had work since kindergarten, let's say, around how to navigate my emotions, how to have the language of emotional intelligence or emotional agility, about how to navigate emotions, how to take care of myself, how to feel through emotions. If I have the resources and the coping skills that are taught over and over again, just like we teach math from kindergarten all the way through in different iterations and scaffolded up, if that work is in front of me around feelings, and I am really struggling, that heightened level of despair that a teenager might have because their frontal lobe's not done, so they can't even get to the logic side of their brain. They're just all emotion. But if they have the proactive coping skills to go, I know how to navigate despair. I know my resources. I know who I can turn to. I know the friend I can talk to, or who's going to be my ally in the school, right? And so I'm not saying we can stop suicide, right? I just think because that's the hope, right? But I still think there's so many questions that what we can do is do so much deeper work around building the skills. So when we hit heightened levels like that, where I can't navigate despair, well, if you've never been taught how to navigate despair, if you've never been taught the skills to do that, then you don't know how to do it. If I've never been taught how to ride a bike, then I'm not going to get on a bike and ride down the street. I'm going to fall and I'm going to get hurt probably. And it's the same thing with these skills these are skills to build around how we navigate feelings. And many schools and many people don't do that work. And it makes sense in the system, right? Of course, there's all this pressure on academics and things like that. But I do think that's proactive work. And so then those moments, hopefully kids can rebound from them, right? Rather than getting to that high level despair that they do something that they don't, that they didn't want to do, right? And it's too late. So I'll just pause there. I know that was probably a lot to share, but I think there's a lot of pieces to, and again, I said it earlier, systems and structures of schools, of communities to change in order to provide the skill building around some of these things that can be really hard to navigate.
You said something so important there, and it's something that I work with my clients as well, is to navigate preparing for, even whether it's you're accompanying someone who is dying, in terminal phase, or you're going through the grief of having lost someone, whether it was unexpected or if it was a long time illness in your family, and how you said everyone deals with it differently. But I think the nervous system, the automatic nervous system, and really making space to create a larger container with this example you used of riding a bicycle is really, really necessary in skills starting from a young age. I insist with my clients so often, especially when you're stuck in this grief brain, when you're going through something so complex and so difficult, even before, like it doesn't have to be necessarily around death. If you're grieving whatever it is you're going through, you need the capacity to understand, okay, I can't trust my brain right now, my neocortex.
Right.
There's so much more going on that, my automatic nervous system is shutting down to protect myself because there are all of these flags going off.
Yes.
I'm in danger, right?
Yep.
So if we don't have those skills, it's so much more complex to deal with the prevention, and at the same time, how do we deal with the aftermath and to help support the community going through that?
Yes.
And then what do we do, Dr. Stephen? What do we do when, for example, the parents don't want to acknowledge or publicly talk about the death by suicide, but the whole community knows? How do we help create safe environments for classmates, friends, siblings to be able to talk about this when the parents just don't want it said out loud? Why is it so important that we talk out loud?
It is really important we talk out loud. And, I, I, that happens a lot. And there is a big piece in school settings that is best practices that American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, through a lot of research, has said that this is how, if there's a loss to a suicidal community, this is the practice. This is the way to do it, to lessen things like suicidal contagion, but to also respect family and things like that. And so the reason I'm sharing that is that there really is a place where that can be very challenging, that where a family may want to go internal, even though their loss is external. And as a community, the choice there has to be the families to kind of lead that way. It doesn't mean, and that just means that doesn't mean that there can't be work that's still done, right? And so it just can't be with the family and the dynamic that sometimes a family who's open might want to do, right? And there's no judgment there. Everyone has a different story about a lived experience of stigma, or some families have this is a part of a pattern in their families based on genetics or things like that. Or there's a religious component to the fear of sharing it, right? Or a part of their lived experience culturally or religiously. So there, you have to kind of respect the family story in that way. And it doesn't mean that the school can't be doing some work. It just has to be in a respectful way. I mean, you can still do work around, hey, and we're going to still bring counselors in to sit with the students. We know this loss happened. And we just can't talk about it as publicly as maybe that might feel easier to the community. There are some best practices also around the way that we talk about suicide and a loss like this. It has to be navigated in a way based on research and history of things like, when I mentioned suicide contagion, is when other kids see a suicide and there's multiple suicides in one community. Part of the way to lessen that is the way that you navigate it. And so it's not about lessening the loss in the community, but it is about lessening, even though we want to lessen stigma, it's about lessening the means. It's about the conversation about the means. And it is sometimes for a period of time, even though people may know, it's the conversation about how they did it. And then also really a school pushing back, or not pushing back, is not the right word, lessening or not even engaging in any conversations about a why, right? Because that can then stir up a community for lots of reasons. So there's some really there's some handbooks and things like that. And if anyone is at a school and they're wondering about how would we navigate a loss like this, really lean into the best practices that are research based from someplace like the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention. There's international organizations also. And then there's the International Association of Suicide Prevention that has some resources too. I think that's really important. Yeah.
What would you say to, if there were teachers or counselors listening?
Yeah.
The best, the best resources, like the 101s, like the easiest things, the simple things they can do to help the community in the school work through a loss.
Yeah.
This time.
Thank you. And thank you for that question, because I actually was thinking to myself, how to simplify it all, really, not to simplify the loss, not to simplify the complexity of it all, but to get to a place that people can grab, right? Because it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot of emotion. It's a lot of it's a lot of confusion. It's a lot. And so I do want to come in a bit to that, kind of zoom in a bit, right? So a couple things. One is, I do think, specifically around prevention work, and then I'll get to the response to the bereavement piece, is that teach kids about their own system. So what I mean by that is, it's really important that kids understand their brain, why it happens that way. There's work of Dan Siegel, who we talked about earlier, that you may know about, the idea that you can teach this to kindergarten, is that you have this piece of your brain that's emotional and you have a piece of your brain that's logical. It's really simplifying it, but a 5-year-old gets this. And sometimes your emotion brain kicks your logic brain way to the side. So let's learn skills to get your logic brain. I'm actually doing a hand signal here around that, to get your logic brain to kind of calm your feeling brain. That's really hard for anyone, and a 5-year-old especially. But if they know that they're in charge of it, that the feelings they're having, you're in charge of. You're in charge of the feelings. Their responses, it's data, it's information that you're getting. And then it's for you as the human to decide how to navigate that. A couple other little simple things is that's coming out in a lot of research is really helping kids to say, instead of saying, I'm mad, or excuse me, or I'm sad, or I'm anxious, to really emphasize and reframe that to saying, I feel mad, I feel sad, I feel anxious, because it's not your identity. You are not mad. You're feeling it. And if they can learn that they own it and it's a feeling, because if you can do that work with elementary kids, then because there are high schoolers out there, if you ask them who they are, they may say, I'm a soccer player, I'm really great at math, I like to write, and I'm anxious. They may identify themselves that way, and it's not an identity, it is a feeling. There are disorders like anxiety disorder or I'm stressed, right? But there are also many times it's a feeling that we're having. I feel stress. So I just share. And again, those are simple little reframing that you can teach every day that helps kid to navigate big feelings. And then the last one I'll share there around kind of prevention work is for teachers to always remember that the best practices on suicide prevention are 3 things. And there are 3 things that most teachers are doing every day that you don't even know, but you can reiterate it over and over again, and you can be more explicit about it now that you hear it from me, right? So the 3 things are how to be a good listener. And so even for 5-year-olds in a kindergarten classroom, you're always telling them like, hey, pause, listen to your friend. What are they telling you? Or listen to the teacher. Teach the skills about how to be a good listener, because someone who's struggling is they're not looking to be fixed. They're looking to be heard about their struggle. So listening is key. The second best practice is about asking really good questions to support. So if I feel disconnected and I'm overwhelmed with my feelings and I feel alone, if you're asking me good questions like, well, tell me more, or what happened, or whatever the questions are, I'm feeling connected to you, and connection is critical. So asking good questions, connection. So again, 5-year-olds, how do you want to meet a new friend? Do you like pepperoni pizza? I like pepperoni pizza. You're teaching them those skills, and all of a sudden they found a friend, they connected. So asking really good open-ended questions. And the third is to know who your support systems are. Right. So again, 5-year-olds, elementary kids, it's all about that idea like, oh, my teacher can help me. There's a custodian who's really wonderful, and the librarian. They're my 3 adults I can go to. And for upper school students, my coach, my minister, whomever it is. But knowing those, and then when you get older, knowing a resource like in the United States, 988, like the emergency, the support line. So those 3 key things. If any teacher or adult's overwhelmed, like I don't know how to help, just remember that you don't need to fix anything. When people are in crisis, they want to be heard, so you need to listen. They don't want to feel alone, so you need to connect. And you want to know and they want to know who to support them. And also, if you're helping them, you want to know who's supporting you. So just simplifying it down that way. And on the other end, let's say there is a loss, those same skills can be used. So if I'm feeling overwhelmed in grief, what do I need? I want someone to hear me and see me in my grief. That's the listening skill. I don't want to feel alone in my grief, so I want to be connected. And I also want to know my resources are. Who's my therapist in my grief work? What's a summer camp I can go to? Who can I talk to? What podcast can I listen to? What resources can I have? Right? So the skills, if we just remember those 3 skills, they're applicable across every part of this conversation, right?
That just feels like such a relief, and it's so hopeful. There's a lot of hope in that we can all participate in helping and coming together as a community. I recently I've one of my clients, I've been helping with a client who has a 9-year old who
Mm,
lost his father, and the community, like the parents, have been so supportive. The parents at school, so like for the mom that right now she doesn't have too much energy, like the other mothers have come together, making sure that the little boy is invited and that, that they're available to contain him in whatever
mm,
way they can.
yeah.
And these just these just very simple and loving things to be there for our community, because if parents are grieving a loss by suicide of one of their children and they have other children,
Yeah.
I mean, if we're part of that community, we can help as a parent
Yeah.
when we take that other child or teenager or that other person and invite them over
Yeah.
our house, to our home, or to do an activity with us, to be there and just listen and hold them and make sure that we're kind of supervising
Yeah. Yeah.
and just being able to later maybe tell the parents, even if they're really lost in their grief, I think they're struggling with this, or
Yeah.
I took the liberty of taking them and we watched a movie and then we talked about it, or we went for ice cream, or
Yeah. Exactly.
that's
Yeah.
so simple and silly, but they're so helpful. And
They are. Yeah.
we forget that we have like all of these tiny resources, or taking lunch to
Yeah.
dinner to the family who's going through this tremendous difficult period of
Yeah.
life right in this moment.
Yeah. Well, and can I share that again from the wisdom of a teen? This is about a year ago in a group. There was a group of the teens. So I usually have about 8 to 10 teens in the group, and they were all talking about how they've lost some friends because friends don't know how to talk to them about their brother or their father or their mother who's died by suicide, and they like friends just walk away or they look the other way, and they're like, "I lost friends." And this one young man, I think he was 15 at the time. He said that a friend of his, he walked right up to a friend of his, "How come you haven't talked to me since my dad died?" He just walked right up. And this friend said, "I don't know what to talk to you about. I don't know what to do." And this boy said, I looked at him in the eye and I said, "Can you just be with me? Just be." And I'm telling you, I cheered up in that group. I was like, oh my gosh, that from his heart he turned to his friend. And again, sometimes all the conversation about boys and feelings, right? He turned to his friend and said, just be. And I think at the root of that, again, we do the conversation we were having earlier about all this want to like fix or make it different or make an impact and everything else like that. And really truly, first, we can't fix that a person's gone. I can't fix that, but I can be. And I could maybe ask, "Hey, tell me a funny story about him." Or do you just want to go get an ice cream, like you said, right? It doesn't, sometimes we're so overthinking. And then we think like, well, shoot, could I go back 10 stages and fix this? Right? No, you can't. It's about integrating and moving forward. And sometimes that means I just want you to be. And maybe there's some schools near you that do this too. There's a lot of schools in this area of the country that have what they call a buddy bench. And the camp where I support with kids who have a loss, we have benches also. And the idea is at the camp, we talk about this all the time. If you are feeling like you're having big feelings about your loss, go find a seat on the bench and someone will come up and sit with you. And they
Oh,
do
beautiful.
all the time, right? And it just, and that's all they need is someone to sit near. So I'm not alone in my grief, right?
Absolutely. And just to share a couple of more ideas.
Yeah, please.
One, this particular boy and mother that I've been accompanying. So the mother decided that she wanted to have like a special ceremony for her
Mm,
son with his classmates, with his closest friends, and some parents decided to come along, and so we decided to do collages
mm,
We printed some pictures of him with his father, and family pictures and pictures that so he could share with his friends, and to be able. And so they were like sitting at different stations with different materials and just writing inspiring messages and putting pictures and messages, and then parents sharing their stories of maybe
Yeah.
some of them had lost their parent, one of their parents, when they were young, and
I
so
love that.
they're
Yeah.
sharing that what it was like for them at the time.
Yes.
And
Yes.
you know, and so then they took one of the collages to school where they have like a grief corner. I can't remember what they call it, but it's this place where they can go to where, if they're feeling sad or they just need a little time out because they feel overwhelmed, they can go there. And so the parents decided to take this one of the collages that they made
Right.
to help support this child. And then in another school, where there was a death by suicide, they made an altar where
Mm.
the high school, the students were in charge of
Yeah.
changing the flowers, bringing different letters or little things that they, wanted to add
Yeah.
as they were going through these emotions, these very heavy
Yes.
emotions of the loss they had in the community. And just,
Yeah, there's so many ways, and I think that it's also sometimes letting young people discover those ways. I'll also share at the camp that up in Maine that we run, we have a couple different kind of rituals that we do for the kids, and one of those is they every year. They have every day they have about an hour and a half of grief work, and we call it grief and restoration. So they do grief work, and then the rest of the time they're campers. They're kayaking and hiking and everything else like that. So it's about learning how to kind of integrate it all into your life, right? But during the grief time, they share the stories of their person, everything else like that. They have one day where they can write a letter to their person. And these kids go off, and I'm telling you, we have kids as young as 8. They are off for 45 minutes writing a letter. And then we collect the letters, and the last night of the week, we give the letters back, and they can decide what they'd like to do with the letter. And so we have a campfire. And so some kids, that's their way of like releasing some energies. They put it in the fire. Other kids put it in their pocket. We've had a kid who want to go dig a hole in the woods, right? But but one of the most profound things about that ritual, in a way, is that one young camper who'd been back about 4 years in a row shared out loud to me that the letter he wrote this year he wanted to keep because he wrote some really funny stuff and memories to his dad. And he says, but the first year I was here, everything I wrote was swear words and angry words. And so I threw it in the fire. So 4 years later, he had grown to this place where he had learned how to integrate it all. He had all of the feelings, right? He could see the path of grief, which can be anger and frustration, but he's grown to a place where he's now integrated that all and wants to keep the letter he wrote, right? So there's a lot of different ways to do that. And then some people, young people who have had, when I do groups, they like the letter writing idea. They'll write a letter and they'll burn it, right? Or they'll write a letter and then come back to it and read it. And they write it right to the person. There's some beautiful ways to do that. Yeah, and we also do one other thing I'll share at camp we do is that we do what we call a hard day letter. So that's when all the campers sit in a circle and they all write an upbeat message to all the other campers. So we pass it around. And so each camper gets a message like, love you, you can do this, thinking about you. And then they decide what day they want to receive that letter in the year. So they may receive it on the day of their loss. They may receive it on a holiday. And you open up this letter and you got 15, 18 messages from your friends saying, you got this, right? And so my loss was on March 4th, and I got my letter in the mail from the kids, right? And it just feels so supportive and caring that I'm connected to these, I mean, these are kids, but I'm connected to them, and they sent me messages of hope and comfort and care. So there's so many ways to navigate all of this. And some of them come from inspiration from kids that they'd like to do this, right? And so listening to them. Yeah.
that's beautiful. So inspiring in such a difficult conversation we had today. Thank you so much, Dr. Karaiskos, for this conversation, for all of your wisdom, for all the insights, for your dedication
Thank
in
you.
creating a world where young people feel seen, heard, and supported.
Yeah.
I really, really, really appreciate it. And to all our listeners out there, if you have not watched the documentary Talk Out Loud, it is a must see. It is so beautifully well done, and when I recommend it all the time because it's so beautifully and delicately and well taken care of. These conversations to open up to such a difficult topic again, but it's just so loving. And so many people have told me that, and of course I cry when I see it.
I do too. And I've seen it. I'm in it, right? So I cry too. Yeah. I learn something every time I watch it too.
Yes. And
Yeah.
they're good tears. It's like,
Oh, yes, for
it's a
sure.
very difficult subject, but you finish watching it with so much inspiration and hope and opening up and seeing how important it is that we talk out loud, that we talk to each other about things that we can't change, that we don't have the answers to, but just sitting there and knowing that we're not alone and that we have other people who can support us, who can listen to us, who can, with an open heart, without trying to fix us or without trying to tell us how we're supposed to do it, or without trying to blame anyone, because there is no one to blame.
You're
So
exactly
that
right.
so that we don't have to feel ashamed if we live this type of loss in our nearby community.
Yes, thank you.
That we have like these safe places.
Yeah. Yeah.
That we become safe people for our community.
Yes, thank you. Yes, you're exactly right. Yeah. Thank you for all that. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for all your care and grace and having this conversation. It was lovely.
I really appreciate it. And I will leave links and things that we talked about that so that our community can also have the resources needed
Thank
for
you.
this, for any event that we don't know, life.
No, no.
We don't know. It's not to scare people, but we need to be prepared in life for everything.
Yeah, and I think, and I know we're wrapping up. I just want to share that one of the things sometimes I talk about, because some schools will sometimes say, "Do we really want to talk about grief?" And I'm like, there are just maybe two things in life that we're all going to experience: birth and death.
Yes,
and we celebrate our birth, and we hide from our grief.
Yeah.
And I do think it's really important that we navigate it and talk about it, and we get in places where we can honor our loved one and not be afraid to talk about them, where we can honor our own work around our grief and know that it builds strength in us to do this work. So I just think that's really important.
So important.
Yeah.
I honor you for the work you do. Thank you so much for bringing this such needed education into the world. And thank you everyone for joining us and listening to us. And see you next time here on Amorte Podcast. I'm Pati Bueno, here with Dr. Stephen Karaiskos. Hope you have a lovely day.